Now, I want to talk about a very strange saying that Jesus mentions in the Gospel of Matthew, in fact, chapter 5, where he says to us, to his disciples, and hence by projection to us, he says, you are the salt of the earth. If the salt has lost its flavor, what good is it? It will be cast out and trodden upon. But the expression salt of the earth is enigmatic. Why? Well, salt comes from the sea. Should he not have said, you are the salt of the sea? That's where salt comes from. That's natural, salt of the sea. But he says, you are the salt of the earth. Now, does the earth produce salt? Well, sometimes some minerals may arise from the earth that can produce salt, but that's not where we get salt. The 99.9% of salt comes from the sea. So why does he say, you are the salt of the earth? Well, was there any particular area in Israel at that time where there was salty earth? And maybe he's referring to that? No, that's not what it appears to be. So what is it? Well, what is probably the intention here is that the Dead Sea was full of salt, absolutely full of salt. In fact, the density of salt in the Dead Sea is something like 80%. You cannot sink in the Dead Sea. Even if you can't swim, you will float on the water because of the absolute concentration of salt. You see, the Dead Sea has no outlet. The river Jordan from Lake Galilee upwards flows straight into the Dead Sea and deposits there all the minerals that eventually sodium chloride becomes, which is salt, built up. So the Dead Sea cannot sustain any life whatsoever. It is dead. It is the Dead Sea. There are no fish in there. It's hard to find living organisms in the Dead Sea, precisely because of the quantity of salt that exists in it. So what has that got to do with you are the salt of the earth that Jesus mentions? Well, we have here in Israel, in Judea, at the time of Jesus, a clue. We have the Dead Sea, and that is full of salt. And we know very well that people would go there and gather salt and take it back to Jerusalem or take it back to their various townships in Judea. That's where they got their salt from. Some of it they got in big quantities. Some was used for household, others were used for other purposes. So what would be the other purpose? It was so abundant. In fact, there, even if you go to the Dead Sea, you will see like pillars, like the pillars of salt. We know that in the book of Genesis, where God warns Lot, L-O-T, not to turn around and watch as Sodom and Gomorrah are being destroyed because of their sinfulness. Well, Lot's wife is tempted to look around and see the destruction, and apparently she turns into a pillar of salt. Now, pillars of salt were very common in the Dead Sea. It's nothing unusual, right? So what would happen is people would take all that salt, and because the salt of the Dead Sea was very nutritious, even today people go there and bathe, and they take the mud from the Dead Sea and put it on them, the salt. It's meant to be very nutritious for the body. They would take that salt and use it for fertilizer. Hence the expression, salt of the earth. In other words, Christ is specifically referring to a particular type of usage that was being utilized in the first century in Judea, of the transportation of salt from the Dead Sea to houses, to farms, wherever crops were grown. It apparently was a very good and strong fertilizer. Now, usually salt is not, but this particular salt from the Dead Sea was apparently quite good, and in fact very good. And so it seems that is what Christ is referring to, the usage of salt on the earth, becoming a fertilizer. You are the salt of the earth. Once it's come from the sea, the salt of the sea has come upon the earth and is being used as a fertilizer, then you are that salt that is being used as fertilizer. You are the salt of the earth, not of the sea, of the earth. That is the purpose of that particular saying. So what do we make out of that saying for us today? Well, it's simple now to work out what he means. Obviously, it's a fertilizer. So I'm a fertilizer, you're a fertilizer. What on earth is a fertilizer? A fertilizer is used to boost the soil, to give it more minerals, to make it fertile, so that the crop that is growing on it will grow quicker, stronger, and will bloom. It will bring forth fruit. It will be productive. It will not wither. It will not just grow and stop growing. It has the fertilizer. It has the salt of the earth. It has that particular fertilizer, helping it to grow, helping it to get stronger, helping it to become productive. It's a nourishment. It's a productive. It is productive. So Christ is saying, you are the salt of the earth. The function of salt that was used for the growth of plants, strong plants, fertile plants, we are now meant to do that in a spiritual or a parabolic or metaphoric way. I am meant to be a nourisher. I am meant to be someone who assists in bringing fruit for the Lord, to bring forth production for the Lord, to bring forth things that are useful for the glory of God. If a salt loses its flavor, I'm not productive, I am not nourishing, I am not nutritional to other people, I'm not nourishing other people, I'm not nourishing myself, I'm not productive, I'm not fruitful. Well, as we know very well, when Jesus once encountered a fig tree and he was very hungry, and the fig tree was not producing fruit, he actually cursed it and it withered. It was an unproductive tree. And that was used as a parable for the spiritual state of Israel at the time of his teaching 2,000 years ago. So this applies now to us, that unless we are productive, unless we bring forth fruit for the Lord, unless we are helping others to become productive in our mission, then we lose the flavor and we have no more purpose. Now it's interesting that salt, that is sodium, the sodium cannot lose its sodium chloride cannot lose its flavor. So how can Jesus say, well, if you lose your flavor, you will be thrown out? Well, the way in which he's sort of insinuating or referring there is that once you add many other minerals to salt, once you keep adding soil and you keep adding other ingredients to salt, then salt will lose its flavor. Not because it is lost its flavor, but because it has been taken over by other chemicals and other minerals. Therefore, it is no longer producing its flavor because it's been taken over. And so what you will smell there will no longer be the salt. You will smell the minerals, the salt, the soil, and the other ingredients that have taken over the smell of the earth there. So in other words, if we are not productive because we have lost flavor, is because we've allowed too many worldly things to come into our life. We've accepted too many responsibilities that are not nourishing others, that are not helping others, that are not helping us to grow. We've accepted worldly desires and worldly appetites that we are therefore looking for worldly things that will not help us to keep the flavor, because we're bringing in too many other ingredients into our spiritual life, losing the flavor, and will be cast out. So the message tonight, holy brothers and sisters, is you are the salt of the earth. He will go on and say you are the light of the world, another time for that. But you are the salt of the earth. By that, it's very clear what he means. He means the salt in Israel was brought from the Dead Sea. It was used in the kitchen, for sure. It was also used for preservative. It was also used for disinfectant in a time that they did not know about microbes and germs and the microscopic life that we now know, thanks to Pasteur and people like that. And the microscope, particularly the microscope, has opened up the door to the invisible microscopic world. Now we know how sickness comes about through germs and viruses and bacteria and so forth. But in those days, that was not well known. It wasn't known at all, actually. But salt, it was known that salt is a disinfectant of some sort, and that was used as a disinfectant. But the main thrust, so we are also a disinfectant against the corruption of the world. We're also, in other ways, a preservative. We are meant to preserve the teachings that we have been given, and so forth. But the main thrust here is the key word, salt of the earth. We are the salt of the earth, that is, we are the fertilizers, we are the nourishers, we are the ingredient, the catalyst that the Lord uses, you the Christian, I the Christian, to bring about spirituality into the world, to nurture spirituality into the world for ourselves and for others. So may Christ bless you to continue to be the salt of the earth. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit.